Hello, everyone. My name's Strat Becker. We're here today covering Hurricane Iota, which is nearing landfall in Nicaragua. Now is a Category 5 hurricane. Definitely one of the more unexpected things of the year, but emphasizes the potential catastrophic risk that this storm brings. Some further intensification is possible before the storm makes landfall, but the key message right now is that a Category 5 landfall is certainly possible, and regardless, that doesn't change the overall impacts that will be expected, which do include, right now at least, a storm surge of 15 to 20 feet above normal tide levels in the areas onshore, particularly just north of the center. Wind obviously is going to be catastrophic, where Eta's Eyewall is coming onshore tonight, with tropical storm conditions spreading into Nicaragua and Honduras, and those conditions starting on the coast pretty imminently right now, so the time to prepare if you're on the coast is basically over. Rainfall is expected to be over 10 inches in numerous countries, including Belize, Nicaragua, Honduras, and reaching to Guatemala as well, and El Salvador is going to get substantial rainfall too. The main story, though, is that much of this rainfall, with these isolated totals up towards 30 inches or 750 millimeters, are going to be in areas that were just impacted by Hurricane Eta 2 weeks ago, exacerbating the impacts already ongoing from that. We have a team tonight to cover this situation, of course, the developments that have continued to come in overnight, and we'll bring them in right now. So we have Isaac, Thomas, Christian, Kay, and Orlando. How is everyone tonight?
I'm good.
Today, actually, to be exact.
That's all right. Yeah, doing fine.
I'm astonished and terrified
I
by the
was not
storm.
expecting this.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's probably no better way to put it. You wake up to a Category 5 storm. Most of us are in the Western Hemisphere on or near the East Coast. You see this after not really expecting to end up with such a situation even just a few hours ago. We went live yesterday, and the odds for a Category 5, I think, were 2 or 8% or something like that. So this was not really within the main realm of expectations to end up occurring. I think that's important to generally emphasize that, it wasn't expected, but despite that, it was still going to be an extremely dangerous storm regardless, and that's really the main message to send tonight as the storm comes on shore.
I think that's absolutely true. The impacts from this storm are going to be absolutely catastrophic. I mean, this storm is going to be making landfall very close to where Eta did, it looks like, unfortunately. So, I mean, it's looking like we're going to get a double hit here for Nicaragua and Honduras, and it looks like catastrophic storm surge, rainfall, and winds are all going to be impacting the coast here just a little bit later today.
Yeah, I don't know if the CDPS rating has changed, but even so, the key message is expectations of up to 30 inches of rainfall, 750 millimeters, especially in areas that haven't had time to properly recover from Hurricane Eta is, that's one of the key points here is the fact that this is coming over one of the exact same areas that just received major impacts literally just 2 weeks ago from another hurricane.
Yeah, I mean, the impacts that this is going to bring again are going to be absolutely catastrophic. I know you just mentioned the CDPS rating. It has been upgraded to a stage 9 this morning, which is the same as Eta's was. So, I mean, this is about as bad as it gets. For context, Goni and Haiyan were both stage 9s as well. So, I mean, Laura was a stage 7. Eta was a stage 9. That should give you a really good idea of where this storm stacks up when it comes to the impacts it's going to be bringing today. It's going to be a really bad situation, and we're going to be here covering it all.
Yeah, and we have the key messages on the screen really quick with the mesoscale imagery. Right now, at least, it isn't really expected to weaken substantially before landfall right now. There was a glimmer of hope this morning, right around 10 a.m., and 9 a.m., where it looked like the eye was covering up for a little bit, but since then it's cleared out again, and we still have this remarkable structure. So extreme winds and life-threatening storm surge are expected. Not possible. They're basically expected to occur at this point. And through Thursday, so even though it's Monday right now, we're looking at another several-day heavy rainfall event, which will lead to life-threatening flash flooding and river flooding across portions of Central America, particularly Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Belize, potentially reaching barely into portions of far southeastern Mexico. You're also going to have hurricane conditions and storm surge impacts still occurring right now on Providencia. We haven't talked about it too much, but there are about 5,000 people there, so they're still getting impacted right now by the system as it's rapidly intensified. And tropical storm conditions are expected with hurricane conditions possible on San Andreas as well. What are you guys looking at more, anything else in terms of the developments that we've seen? Because a lot of it's really come in unexpected.
I think what we're all looking at is it's come this far. We'll come to terms with that eventually. But for now, we're just looking to what it's going to do in the future. And the National Hurricane Center is forecasting a intensity just offshore of 145 knots. For context, given the current pressure and wind relationship, if it were to make landfall at 145 knots or 165 miles an hour, it would likely become the 7th most intense Atlantic hurricane landfall ever recorded, beating Irma, Michael, just behind Dorian.
Yeah, I mean, climatologically based and just historically, to add on to that too, there's no really a precedent for this. There hasn't been a Category 5 this late in the year. In fact, until right now, there hasn't been a hurricane in this particular area in the basin this late in the year before. So we're seeing norms shattered, and unfortunately, it's at the worst possible time for Nicaragua, Honduras, and the rest of Central America, which are still reeling from Eta's impacts a couple weeks ago. Is there new recon heading into the storm? Because, of course, the reason that upgrades were possible...
There is, yes.
Yes, there is.
But I don't think it's going to be there this hour.
Yeah, but when's the first pass expected right now from that?
I believe it's around an hour and a half, potentially. Although it might be earlier again, because they've been trying to get off as soon as possible. So, but at least an hour.
Yep. So we will be getting new information from that front relatively soon, not during this hour of coverage, but that'll be factored into future things. And it's important that we continue to get that stuff. It gives us the continuous information that we need to have accurate information in lieu of a life-threatening situation like this. Isaac, you got some satellite imagery as well. Thank you for being here. That's mesoscale really zoomed in on the center of the storm that I want to pull up for a second, if that's okay with you.
That's fine. You can see this is a 150 frame loop, and keep in mind this is a 1 minute imagery loop off of Go16. Go16 could go up to 1 image every 30 seconds, but in this particular case, they set it 1 minute imagery here, so you're seeing 1 image every minute throughout the past 150 frames here, sort of past 3 hours here, as the storm's getting progressively better organized here. We thought, like you said earlier, maybe it might trying to have a hiccup here, maybe it might be trying to finally weaken, but that does not appear to be the case at all whatsoever in these latest frames here. We can really see that eye-claim, it's going to be a really bad scenario for Nicaragua here. Unfortunately, you guys got impacted by, of course, Hurricane Eta, which made landfall as a Category 4, I think roughly about 2 weeks ago, and now you're dealing with a Category 5 catastrophic hurricane knocking on your doorstep here. So if we didn't take Eta seriously, then you need to really rethink that and take this storm seriously as well. This is a even more strong storm than Eta was officially at this point. So please take this hurricane seriously. Listen to your local officials. If they're telling you to evacuate, which it might be probably too late to at this point, but if they're still saying so, you do it as soon as you possibly can, because these coastal areas here, from what I understand, they're really low lying here, and most of the buildings are not able to withstand a major hurricane even here. So I'd really dread to see what type of damage we get when this storm finally does make a landfall.
Yeah, and we talked about it last night, that the time to prepare, especially on the coast, if you're inland, you probably still have a couple more hours, especially if you're more in Honduras. But in far eastern Honduras and coastal Nicaragua, the time to prepare was probably going to shut off last night, because by the time you woke up today, conditions would be rapidly deteriorating. Unfortunately, to add on to that, the storm has deepened another, I think, 18 millibars in under 12 hours or so, and that's after it dropped extraordinarily 10 millibars in pressure in 1 hour, too. So we are looking at a storm that has stronger winds than Eta. It's the same pressure, I think, as Eta's peak right now, but it's possible we still drop lower than that. And really, to compound things, it is entirely possible that this thing makes landfall within about a dozen or so miles from where Eta made landfall as well, right?
It's going to be cutting it close, definitely. Definitely going to be cutting it close, I can assure you that.
Yeah, initial expectations 2.5 days ago or so when this thing was first forming was that we'd see a landfall potentially in far eastern Honduras. Unfortunately, for areas that really were seeing the most extreme wind damage and surge damage from Eta 2 weeks ago, that track shifted south. And while population centers aren't as large where the storm's coming on shore as if it were further north, you're seeing an area that just got extreme impacts getting the same things again in such short order. There is no precedent at this time of year for such an event like this to occur, and that really emphasizes the danger that the storm poses at 160 miles an hour, with further strengthening currently anticipated by the National Hurricane Center in the next 12 hours. We're here during this hour to take questions and help people out that may be curious about certain things. So if you have any questions, start your message at Force13 in the chat, or hashtag Force13 lights up the message in a nice bright orange for us, allows us to see what you're curious about, and we'll be able to get to those as quickly as we can. Let's see. Actually, quick question as well, and Kay or Isaac or Thomas can answer this very easily too. Someone's asking, is Iota still strengthening? The CDO and eyes look better than ever. I think we talked about that briefly, if we want to touch on that again.
Yeah. We thought it might have peaked because the pressure didn't change between two Recon passes, and the convective structure on satellite was degrading slightly. But since then, it's more than rebounded, and in all likelihood, we'll find a storm that's deeper when the next mission arrives.
Yeah, I think Isaac's rapid scan here on the mesoscale really shows that pretty well, because you can see at the start, the eye looks more ragged, almost like it's trying to cloud over. And then by the time you get to the latter parts of this loop, it really clears out again. You see almost full symmetry in the positive eye temperature, as well as the structure of the eye looking more round than it was at the start of the frame too. So, continued intensification could still be ongoing right now. This one's a bit of a guessing one, and it's not really the largest importance, but I'm going to talk about it just to highlight the risk this brings. Someone's asking, how much extra damage is this going to bring on top of what already happened from Eta a couple weeks ago? And the simplest answer is you're going to be looking at a lot of extra damage. This is a Category 5 storm that's coming on shore, and then one of its largest threats will be once it's well inland and much weaker, as it's possible you get up towards a meter of rainfall, currently forecast peaks of 750 to 800 millimeters of rain, well inland in Honduras, where the storm's not forecast to even be a hurricane at that point in time. So widespread impacts are expected to be wide-reaching from this. It's wide to stage 9 on the CDPS scale, and you almost certainly will see very substantial damage, unfortunately, on top of what we saw quite recently as well. Another question in the chat, and I think Kay, you can talk with this as well. Does Eta have a pinhole eye? This is probably an interesting question to go over, considering what we saw last night and into today.
Well, as much as it might surprise some people hearing about that incredible fact of 10 millibars in less than an hour, officially it doesn't have a pinhole eye. It's 12 nautical miles, and it would need to be smaller than that to be classified as a pinhole structure. So it's a small eye for certain, but not a pinhole, and that makes its intensification all the more staggering.
Yep, absolutely. The other storms we've seen this year in this part of the basin really rapidly intensify, particularly Delta and Eta, which are the 2 of the 3 strongest or fastest intensifying storms on record in the entire basin. Both have pinhole eyes. You'd expect, based on what we know, for a system like this to have one as well. That just wasn't the case. And surprising as it may be, it hasn't stopped the storm from intensifying at an absolutely extraordinary pace. At this point in the year or later, not only is this the strongest storm at this point in the year or later in the Atlantic, but it's also the fastest intensifying in wind speed and pressure for this time of the year too. So there hasn't ever been a storm at this point or later in the year that's ever held anything in this regard. That really points out the extraordinary nature of what we've really seen unfold with this system, despite, best wishes for it to really be otherwise. And, the best we can do really is bring awareness as this thing comes on shore.
And keep in mind, this is...
Yep.
Go ahead.
No, go for it.
Keep in mind, this is in, really rare, extremely exceptionally rare territory here. There's only been one other Category 5 in November, and that wasn't nearly as late as this is happening right now. And that was, of course, the 1932 Cuba hurricane, and that also, of course, peaked to Category 5. So it's in really record territory here. There's only been 2 Category 5 hurricanes in recorded history in the Atlantic Basin in the month of November. One of them being the 1932 Cuba hurricane, and now the second one being Hurricane Iota here is what you're looking at. So really record-breaking storm yet again for this hurricane season. And again, I just really fear to see what type of damage is going to be seen once this thing passes and makes landfall in Nicaragua. It's going to be quite the scary sight, I imagine, for people who are not heeding the evacuations or not heeding the advice given by local officials or the National Hurricane Center here. Really, really, really bad scenario we're talking about here.
Yeah, and I mean, that adds on to the fact, too, that, you know, just to mention the unprecedented nature again, there's never been a storm that's even been hurricane strength at this particular portion of the basin at this point in the year or later. We had Otto a bit later in the year, which was further south, but this part of the basin in particular has never seen a storm near this intensity at this point in the year, and that's absolutely, you know, mind-boggling to recognize, really. A couple new questions as well. So I'm asking if the storm will re-strengthen the Pacific. It's almost certain that this thing will dissipate over Central America and won't reform over the Pacific Ocean. A question I think Kay can answer as well based on terminology. How does triple outflow work? And this is something that's been noted in forecast discussions and general forecasts quite a few times over the past day or so because of the unusual nature of it.
Just exactly the best kind of is in. And it's where, rather than your standard dual outflow, where you have an outflow channel heading to the pole and another heading to the equator, which is quite efficient at getting the outflow away from the storm after it rises in the Eyewall. But triple outflow increases that so much more and allows a storm to have basically perfect outflow, no issues with the convection not being able to go anywhere, because it rises up in the storm, but then it has to go somewhere.
Yeah, that's it pretty much. Let's see, just going through and seeing a couple more questions as well. And this goes to it somewhat as well. Someone's asking if the extremely aggressive outflows, what's allowed the storm to intensify quickly. You know, it's certainly part of it. You know, no way to say no in that regard. But at the same time, there's other factors, including its general structure. It still is a smaller than average storm, despite its eye not being pinhole. So that's one of the reasons to be able to seek quicker intensification again in this part of the basin late in the year, along with the environmental factors being unusually conducive for this point in the year. Not necessarily the sea surface temperatures and ocean heat content, which are typically, you know, conducive for a stronger storm at this point in the year in this area, but wind shear at this point, when you're getting later on in November in particular, and definitely into December, ramps up much more across the basin and in the Caribbean, so you typically don't see storms get as strong this late in the year because of that. You know, unfortunately, we've seen multiple times, even this month, that isn't enough to stop storms from getting incredibly strong this year, as that shears remain below average.
Just wanted to, I know we're saying CDPS 9, and a lot of the people on the chat are saying CDPS 9, but for anybody who maybe just might be joining and may not know what exactly the CDPS scale is, can any of you guys describe to our viewers here what exactly CDPS 9 means?
Yeah, so the CDPS scale is made by our chief hurricane analyst, Evan Williams, and basically what it does is it takes a ton of hurricanes and tropical cyclones from around the world, all the way from, I believe, like the 90s to now, and it says, okay, well, here it puts them all into brackets. So like a CDPS stage 1 means that those storms are in the lower 10% of all damage that hurricanes do. When you have a stage 9 on the CDPS scale, that means that this is in the top 10% of hurricanes when it comes to the amount of damage it's capable of doing. So to put that into context, what that really means is that we're up there with Haiyan, we're up there with Goni, we're up there with Eta, which just happened. we're nearly to levels of Dorian. I mean, we're on the upper echelon of what you get when it comes to the destruction potential of a hurricane. So basically, it takes more factors into account than the Saffir-Simpson scale. So that's why, like some tropical storms that stall can get higher CDPS ratings than some Category 3s going out to sea. But in this case, Stage 9 is something you need to take very seriously. That means extreme damage is likely, and it's going to be absolutely catastrophic.
Yep, and I want to reiterate in terms of those preparations and taking it seriously too, that unfortunately for many areas on the direct coast in eastern Nicaragua and Honduras, as we emphasized last night, time to repair is quickly coming to an end. Tropical storm force winds will be coming on shore imminently if they haven't already, and conditions will really rapidly deteriorate from here on out. So it's not really safe to go outside in those circumstances due to debris and other risks. So, hopefully everyone's already been prepared, and particularly if they're in low-lying areas evacuated already, especially if they're given orders to do so by local officials. I want to point out as well that if you're further inland, so more inland in Honduras, in Guatemala, in Belize, in El Salvador, and even in parts of more western Nicaragua, you still have at least a few more hours to prepare, but any preparations should be rushed to completion really in the next few hours or so. You don't want to be past the afternoon today and still stuck without a proper plan or action in place. It's always important to make sure you have that hurricane plan in place. Make sure you're actually carrying it out in a situation like this, and of course listening to local officials for information on your exact location, whether they be evacuation orders or if they're giving you certain supply routes for things that you may need to protect yourself in your home. Make sure you're always staying up to date on those. Emergency hotlines and situations like this are always important too. So make sure you're staying up to date in those regards. If you have any more questions that you want to ask during the hour, we're going live for another near 35 minutes or so. Start your message with Force13 or at Force13 in text. Lights the message in bright orange for us, allows us to keep the conversation going based on what you guys are curious about in the chat. See, we got a couple new questions coming in. This one's about the CDPS briefly. How many stage 10s have there been? I'm not sure about the exact number, but stage 10 correlates to a top 1% of landfalling storms. So for every 100 landfalling storms you'll have maybe one be a stage 10 for that. Stage 9 is the top 10%, so you'll have 10 for every 100 landfalling storms typically be a stage 9 or above in that regard. So there's some clarification on that context as well. People are asking certain things about the intensity as well. I mean, we've talked about how the eye's been clearing up. Do we see any more substantial intensification ongoing in the next several hours right now?
I think it's going to be hard to tell until the Recon gets in. It could be intensifying gradually, or it could be rapidly intensifying once again.
Yeah, that's probably the best way to put it. There's some speculation until we get more hard data from the Recon, but fortunately, that's going to be in probably in under 90 minutes now. The latest update on the plane was at 17.9 degrees north, 84.2 degrees west, and the storm is located, I think, around 200 or so miles from that, so it might not happen this hour, but by the time that we get to 12:30 p.m. on the East Coast or 1 p.m., there'll be some new Recon and new hard data to go off of for the next intermediate advisory from the National Hurricane Center. Questions about the area of interest as well, briefly. I do want to touch on that, but not really focus much. I think it's still a 20% chance of development in the next 5 days, and I'm pretty sure only the GFS still picks up on it for any potential development. Does anyone want to mention that very briefly?
I mean, at this point, it's just going to bring more rain to an area that doesn't want any.
Yeah, I think
if it does form.
Yeah, it's important to note that regardless of development, that system will probably bring enhanced rainfall to areas that are getting walloped by Iota and are still recovering from Eta. So, regardless of a development, people there should still be taking caution towards it because of the exasperated rainfall impacts that it could still end up bringing, even if it doesn't become a named storm whatsoever. Someone asked about the brown ocean effect. I think the simple thing is we know once this thing makes landfall that it's going to start rapidly weakening. There's no reason that this would go over land, lose its source of energy in the pretty warm waters in the Western Caribbean Sea here in high ocean heat content, and then decide to strengthen and regardless of that, or maintain strength. Rapid weakening is expected once this thing comes on shore. The ship's decay model is what the National Hurricane Center is using for forecasting weakening over land. So you're probably going to see this weaken at least or around 80 to 90 miles an hour in sustained winds within 24 hours of landfall, if not more than that. And then the weakening pace slows off afterwards. But there's no reason to expect right now that this storm would maintain intensity after going over land.
Keep in mind, this is we're talking about a Category 5 hurricane here, so, I mean, once it loses its energy source that it's tapping into right now, which, of course, is the really warm Caribbean sea surface temperatures at this point and heads inland, it's just going to kind of capitulate here and start to rapidly weaken. We're not talking about a tropical storm here. Maybe that might occur with a tropical storm, but right now we're talking about a Category 5 hurricane here, which, are two completely different things here. So like what Strad alluded to earlier, I would definitely see this thing rapidly weakening up upon landfall here once it loses its energy source, which of course is the ocean.
Yeah, I mean, when you have storms this strong and they have something that disrupts them in terms of land attraction, I think Goni from a couple weeks ago is a really good example here. Mm-hmm. They, at least initially, decay very rapidly in intensity. They'll drop off an absolute cliff. And then eventually when a storm's weaker, it doesn't have as much left to go down in wind speed, so you'll see the trend of weakening slow down. But, this isn't like, a tropical storm or low-end Category 1 where it's weakening. Let's say Isaias, as an example, is going to be slower because of how quick it's moving or other atmospheric interactions. It's pretty clear-cut right now that this thing's going to rapidly weaken. But I do want to point out, and I don't know if anyone has specific rainfall graphics, that despite that rapid weakening in wind speed, this storm may be its most dangerous when it is far weaker in wind speed and farther inland. Because when it's coming over Honduras, that's where the peak rainfall totals are expected right now, towards 750 to 800 millimeters on top of what's already fallen from Eta. So even though the storm's expected to lose, obviously, lots of its wind speed as it moves inland, it's going to be just as dangerous, particularly for areas in Honduras, Nicaragua, Guatemala, and Belize that will be getting that very high rainfall totals pouring in from the Caribbean Sea, and El Salvador too.
El Salvador, in fact, has just activated a code red alert for the entire country, meaning they're expecting widespread devastating impacts from this storm, even as a tropical depression or remnant low.
Yeah, and that's probably one of the most important things to point out too, to reiterate. Again, just because the storm is going to weaken inland does not mean that it won't be any less life-threatening. It could very well be its most dangerous in terms of impacts when it's well inland in a tropical storm or a tropical depression. We've said it a lot, but 90% of the deaths from tropical cyclones occur from flooding, whether it be storm surge, rainfall, river flooding, mudslides, other issues that are caused by flooding. That's where the bulk of your casualties unfortunately occur. So even though the wind speeds will be dying down very quickly, and of course are a major threat for the landfall vicinity, the main threat from the system for the region as a whole is going to be another round of heavy rainfall at very high levels over the next several days on top of what's already fallen from Hurricane Eta.
This is just a nightmare scenario pretty much here for Central America. We're looking at, they just got beaten up really bad by a Category 4 hurricane by the name of Eta roughly about 2 weeks ago. And now catastrophic Category 5 Hurricane Iota is knocking on their doorstep.
Yeah, absolutely. A question in the chat as well, and I think we can have some conversation about this. Someone's asking if there's any signs of an Eyewall replacement cycle yet. And the unfortunate answer that I'm pretty sure based on the latest Recon pass is there's no particularly clear signs of that. There is no double wind maximas that would indicate that, if I'm not mistaken, Kay.
Yeah, the latest reconnaissance data, which is about 3 hours old at this point, and microwave at the same time, showed 0 signs of a secondary eyewall, and it wouldn't be able to kick in such a short time. We may see one starting when the next mission arrives, but at this point, too little too late. Even if the storm weakens below Category 5 by landfall, it wouldn't change the surge impacts, and the rain wouldn't be unaffected either.
Yeah, that's also one of the most important points to prove. Say for some reason this drops below Category 5 status before landfall, which is possible, but isn't currently forecast. That doesn't change that it will be just as life-threatening in that scenario as compared to the current forecast where it's expected to keep Category 5 status to landfall. You know, an Eyewall replacement cycle, say it knocks it down 5-10 miles an hour in the next 12 hours and stops the trend of improvement on satellite appearance, isn't going to change the threat that this storm brings to life and property whatsoever. And anyone in Central America, particularly Nicaragua and Honduras, where this thing's coming on shore now, with conditions deteriorating rapidly on the coast, should not take it any less seriously in the event that it weakens very, very slightly in that time period.
Exactly. I don't think people understand just because it weakens from a Category 5 down to a high-end Category 4. That this is of course still a very serious storm. I mean, recent examples, like I think of Hurricane Maria made landfall in Puerto Rico as a high-end Category 4, caused catastrophic damage to the island here. And another example, a little bit weaker, and it was also a tiny little storm too, Hurricane Charlie in 2004, with 150 mile per hour landfall in Florida in 2004, and that also caused really devastating and catastrophic damage to buildings over there.
Yep. And a question from the chat as well, real quick, asking about the expected storm surge that we're going to end up seeing right now. That's been upped a bit from 10 to 15 feet, which is about 3 to 5 meters, to 15 to 20 feet, which is 5 to 7 meters. So the surge impacts have been increased, or the expected surge impacts, as the storms continue to intensify above prior expectations. That'll be north of where the storm makes landfall, just north in particular. You'll have storm surge on the southern side of the landfall location, but because of how tropical cyclones work, counterclockwise rotation, the storm surge won't be as significant on the southern side of the center than the northern side. But, particularly for those that may end up being just on the northern portion of this system when it comes on shore, 15 to 20 feet of storm surge, 5 to 7 meters, that is very life-threatening and potentially deadly. The National Hurricane Center's, synopsis at their update emphasizes that general danger, that Iota becomes a Category 5 hurricane, forecast bring catastrophic winds, life-threatening storm surge, and torrential rainfall to Central America. So whether anyone likes it or not, the risk is here, and this is a potentially catastrophic storm that's about to come on shore. Someone asked if we have any rainfall graphics that we can pull up. I know, Thomas, that there's some models that show generally rainfall forecasts, so there isn't a National Hurricane Center specific graphic for it right now, right?
That's correct. I have a few models that are pulled up here, and we can go through them each real quick. I have the H-Wharf as a starter on my screen. I'd like to note that this is a little out of date.
Screen real quick. I'm sorry, I just got to pull up your screen very quick.
It's fine. But I'd just like to note, while Strat's doing that this is a little out of date. This is as of 12 Zulu on the, this is actually a couple days ago that this forecast was rendered. So you can see quite a farther north track than what's actually going to occur. But you get the general idea here. The H-Wharf predicting at the site of landfall in west mountainous regions still over 2 feet of rain a possibility. And then you can see here in the most mountainous regions of Honduras in particular, well over 32 inches of rain possible there. I think it would be reasonable to suggest over 40 inches of rain being a possibility in those most mountainous regions. As for the 60 inches that the H-Wharf predicts in this particular run, I think that's a little high. Regardless, I mean, you're still getting ridiculous amounts of rainfall. Here's the latest HMON. This is as of, basically the very latest that we have, courtesy of the HMON. And what you can see is, again, there, over 16 inches of rain in isolated areas, over 24 likely at the site of landfall. And then again, the highest amounts of rainfall in those most mountainous ranges of Honduras there. And you can still see some areas that go into those purples of over 32 inches. The GFS showing a similar solution with over 24 inches of rain in those most mountainous areas, and still over 24 inches of rain possible in Nicaragua and Honduras, and the GFS parallel with a very similar message here. So overall, the big message to get across, Eta's already dropped a ton of rain, and you're going to be getting an additional at least 2 feet of rain in some of these areas, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think these graphics as well do a very good job at showing that the threat from this system isn't minimized whatsoever, or minimized, after the storm makes landfall begins to rapidly weaken in terms of its wind speed. because you look at that graphic and you see the highest forecast rainfall amounts are over portions of north central Honduras and the more mountainous terrain. And the storm won't actually be crossing those areas or getting its closest approach to those until it's a tropical storm or tropical depression in intensity. So, once this thing moves inland, its threat isn't going to go down whatsoever for certain areas, which are going to see their rainfall maximums. It could be going up at that point in time, and that's when the storm may actually be its most dangerous. If we're talking about the latest full advisory in terms of rainfall expectation from the National Hurricane Center, they are saying that Honduras, northern Nicaragua, southeast Guatemala, and southern Belize are expecting regionals of 10 to 20 inches of rain, 250 to 500 millimeters, with isolated maximums towards or 30 inches or 750 millimeters, especially from northeast Nicaragua into northern Honduras in particular, which those models do a good job at depicting there. Northeastern Nicaragua, northern Honduras, those highest regional totals expected. It's not surprising if we end up seeing isolated amounts in those very mountainous terrains higher than 750 millimeters by at least a marginal degree. But regardless, if you're getting, 500 to 750 millimeters of rainfall in just a day or two, when you just had that same amount of rainfall fall less than 2 weeks earlier from another hurricane event, it's an extremely dangerous situation. And like Kay alluded to as well, this threat just isn't just isolated to those areas. El Salvador and Panama are expecting 4 to 8 inches of additional rainfall with isolated maximums of up to 12 inches. So that's 100 to 200 millimeters regional, isolated maximums to 300 millimeters. And that's why they're expecting significant damage there, and their government's taking action ahead of the storm's approach. But, and that also feeds in the key messages too. But I think the important thing to note is that these rainfall forecasts are additional rainfall on top of what's already fallen. You can clearly see from the infrared, and if there was any radar that wasn't down right now, you'd see it from that as well, that rainfall is already occurring on shore and has been for some time. We saw those very outer bands lapping at the northeastern coast of Nicaragua and far eastern Honduras last night. Those are much further inland now, and the core of the system is going to start approaching the shore soon. Rainfall's already been accumulating here, and that's only going to continue, unfortunately.
I think that we can all agree rainfall is the highest threat with this system, because it's going to be the most far-reaching impact from it. If you're along the coast of Nicaragua and Honduras, you're going to be getting a lot of rainfall. If you're well inland, you're still going to be getting a lot of rainfall. Rainfall is the thing that, regardless of where you are within the storm's track, the impacts will be equally as severe, if not more severe, further inland as weakening begins to occur more rapidly.
Yep. We really gotta, pound in that point, especially for those that are more inland, whether they're in western Nicaragua or they're further in Honduras, or if you're in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Belize, or Panama, and still have those few extra precious hours for repair. Many of those areas, by the time you get to later this afternoon, this evening, your time for preparation will also be over. It's definitely over by tonight, as conditions will be deteriorating in many of those areas rapidly as we head into the day tomorrow. Take advantage of the remaining time left to make sure your preparations are complete. Have your hurricane plan in place, and make sure you have your non-perishables, a weather radio if you can get that, general reinforcements if you need those for your location if you're more flood prone or prone to more wind damage, and make sure you're staying up to date with your government officials in regards to information in your exact location, whether it be if they have certain routes for you to take to get certain supplies that they've set up to drop off for people, whether they have evacuation orders in place that you may be under. If you're under an evacuation order, please make sure you're actually listening to it in a scenario like this. This is really life-threatening, not just at the landfall area, as we've pointed out many times, but well inland where rainfall is going to be a very major threat. So if you're in a flood-prone area from areas when they get very heavy rainfall, and that's coming on top of another 750 millimeters that's just fallen 2 weeks ago, really make sure you're taking this time to finish preparations or listen to local officials if they're ordering you to evacuate in a situation like this, because you won't get another chance to do so in a couple hours from now, unfortunately.
Yeah, and places as far as Guatemala have mandatory evacuations for areas prone to flooding, particularly areas that were impacted by Eta. And something that people who haven't been impacted but are observing from afar, maybe they got relatives there, the impacts of Eta have taken out a lot of the primary flood defences that a single use in these areas, and those can't be rebuilt. And they're designed to work once and be rebuilt because you would never expect two major hurricanes to make landfall and bring 30 inches of rainfall in the same month. So the situation we're experiencing, the flood defenses aren't prepared for it, and we're likely to see worse impacts from Iota's rainfall than from Eta's. And we know how bad Eta was.
Yeah, and we were mentioning it last night, but it's important to be reminding that, many of these places, some of them fortunately haven't had people return yet because of Eta, and that means they don't have to evacuate again. But more importantly is the fact that much of these areas have not had time to repair their infrastructure, whether that be damaged roads or bridges that are used for supplies in situations like this, or whether it be, like you mentioned there, those one-time defense system uses, which work one time, but then have to be rebuilt to work a second time. They haven't had the time to go back and reconstruct many of those things because the time frame is such short in proximity. And, that's not really a fault of the government there. They're working with the supplies they have. It's more just the fact that this is an unprecedented event where you have two storms in November that are at least high in Category 4 intensity making landfall in the same region. We're looking at potential landfall maybe a dozen or so miles from where Eta did. And also moving relatively slowly after moving inland to where they're bringing, maximums upwards of 750 millimeters of rainfall. It's hard to emphasize the extreme risk that this system poses, not just because of its current strength, but because of the fact that many of these regions have not had time to repair vital infrastructure and protection systems that they use to limit damage. And unfortunately, right now, at least as well, it looks like we're seeing a burst of convection in the southern Eyewall, or southeastern Eyewall, if I'm not mistaken. I think, Isaac, you have some satellite imagery regarding that, right?
You could see those last few frames there, and then we go ahead and see if I could stop it here. Here's the last frame here, and you can see those really cold cloud tops here of over negative 80 degrees Celsius here. You can see it popping up on the southeastern part of the Eyewall here. So the storm is really trying to quickly get together here before landfall. And there goes here's another frame. Here's a new frame right now, and you can see that even more on this newest frame here. And this is as of 1641 UTC. And then let's go back about 3 hours. And this is what the storm looked like about 3 hours ago.
Yeah.
3
and
hours
this was
ago.
Shortly
now.
after that first frame is shortly after they found required evidence to upgrade it to Category 5 intensity. The satellite imagery has improved markedly since then, though we haven't had reconnaissance aircraft in the system for some time. I think it's about 2 hours now. Fortunately, in the next hour we're going to get a pass, but the storm's fought off what it looked like to be a moment where it could really degrade in appearance and try to weaken a bit, and that's just really unfortunate to go with it.
Yep.
I think this situation... I'll go for it.
Oh, I was just going to say this. Just look at this. Is again, keep in mind this is 3 hours ago. This frame that you're looking at right now, 3 hours ago, and then here's now. Now, 3 hours ago. Now, just a really remarkable improvement in the span of 3 hours here. The storm is gone.
Yeah.
A bit of a tilt in the symmetry in terms of the minus 70 degree cloud tops. They're much more concentrated in the northwest than in general.
Well,
They're more
that's because
northerly
there's
based at
a
that point.
slight bit of shear beginning due to a high in the central Caribbean, but because it's not a pinhole eye, it won't get cut up like Delta did, and it'll be able to keep strengthening potentially through this slight increase in shear. And you can see that because on the side that is affected greatest by shear, which is in this case the southern, there's a blow up of minus 80s that has already wrapped a third of the way around the eye wall. It's just incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, Thomas, you were saying something?
I was just going to say, I think the worst news is that one of the telltale signs that a storm is intensifying is when you get these hot towers right next to the eye that fan out away from the eye like this, which means that the eye is strong enough to keep them out. But not only that, the temperature gradient you can see on the northwestern side between the eye and the CDO isn't all that tight and compact. The rest of the eye was like that earlier. Now you have a temperature gradient where you get minus 80s right into positive temperatures in a very short distance. So the fact that that temperature gradient is tighter is a sign that this storm is strengthening right now, and it could be doing so quickly. I'm getting worried to see what Recon's going to find when it flies in there.
And just to reiterate, Kay, when is the next Recon really going to make its pass? How far out are we looking at right now?
Let me just reload this. While I'm waiting for it to reload, I'd like to comment on the fact that people were saying earlier on that a stadium effect was beginning to become apparent, and I think you can see it when you look in the satellite imagery at the northern side. That large gap where there's a large area of sort of minus 60s, I think that's indicative of some sort of stadium effect in the eye.
Yep.
Maybe we'll be able to get some imagery from the Recon, but that'd be incredible to see.
Yeah.
Regards to Recon, they are about an hour. They are within an hour of the center. They have begun to descend to flight altitude, so 10 minutes to reaching the correct level, and then half an hour from there, so 40 minutes to the fix, most likely.
All right, awesome. So really, by the middle of the next hour, you'll see that Recon pass. There's multiple places where you can find data on that. We'll definitely be incorporating into our own future coverage and updates. Isaac, you were going to say something as well?
I'm going to try to put up a visible imagery here, so go off my screen for a second, and I'll let you know when I get that on, so you can get a better look at the stadium effect eye the storm is trying to put.
Right now, at least, this is another mesoscale imagery, and you can really see, this is the RGB, those blacks and grays on the southeastern part of the eyewall there. That's the blow-up that we were talking about, that other imagery. Very intense, and someone's asking a question as well, saying, is this the strongest storm of the year? I think by pressure, right now at least, operationally, it's tied with Eta for the lowest pressure.
It's below Eta.
It's below Eta now?
This is the strongest storm in pressure and winds.
There you go. So it is the strongest storm of the year, on top of everything else that we've seen with it. And
it's going to be one of the last storms of the year.
Yeah. Hopefully this is the last storm of the year. Can't make any promises, but I certainly hope this is the last one concerning everything that's happened. But, again, historical precedents being broken here in terms of rapid intensification, and this system is another major life-threatening storm for large portions of Central America that are still reeling from impacts from Hurricane Eta. Isaac, do you have that imagery up yet, or do you want to just wait an extra minute real quick?
Just wait another 2 minutes or so. It's, of course, taking longer to load now that we're on stream.
Don't worry about it. If you have any other questions that you want to answer pretty quickly, though, because we are going to have to end things off in about 10 to 15 minutes or so, start your message with the @Force13 in text and chat, or #Force13, the 2 words. Lights it up in a nice bright orange for us last to see what you're curious about. We'll be able to get to those as soon as those start rolling in. I just want to go over the watches and warnings real quick as well, and then we'll probably be able to see some of the questions flood in at that point because of the stream delay. But currently, again, there's a hurricane warning in effect for Providencia and also the coast of Nicaragua from the Honduras-Nicaragua border to Sandy Bay, Sirpi, and also on the coast of the northeastern Honduras from Punta Pacuta to the Honduras-Nicaragua border. There's a hurricane watch in effect for San Andreas, and there's a tropical storm warning in place for San Andreas, the coast of Nicaragua from south of Sandy Bay, Sirpi to Blue Fields, and the northern coast of Honduras from west of Punta Pacuta to the Guatemala-Honduras border, as well as the Bay Islands. You're obviously going to have storm surge of 15 to 20 feet on the northern side of that eyewall when it comes on shore, and that's not reflected in the warnings here, but that is going to occur alongside the other impacts we've been talking about. Flooded questions coming in now. Let's see, we answered the question about strength. Someone said, is it normal for hurricanes to have hail? Because they were noting that Recon was finding hail in the eyewall. And, Kay, do you want to pick that one up real quick?
Well, you only really get hail in the most intense storms with the highest cloud tops because tropical cyclones are, at the tops of the tropical cyclones, you would have ice crystals at minus 90 degrees Celsius. But as you go down into the storm, generally it melts into rain. So the only way for the hail to get that down without melting would be for the downdrafts to be especially intense, and that would imply that the updrafts are intense, and you get the strongest updrafts and downdrafts in a rapidly intensifying system. So the lower the hail gets, the stronger, the faster the storm's intensified in the last few hours or so.
Yeah. It typically isn't common where you end up seeing that too, right? Just want to double check.
Yeah, it's not especially common. You do get it more often in most intense tropical cyclones, Category 5s and such, but still unusual. Definitely.
Yep. Definitely for sure. In that regard, just going through seeing we have a couple other questions as well. Someone asking the forward movement speed and the expected change in that. Right now, we're at west at 9 miles an hour, which is 1 mile an hour on average slower than we were looking at 12 hours ago. However, it is the landfall time expectations have moved up a bit. So it is expected to make landfall now sooner than last night and yesterday. The point at 0Z, which is 7 p.m. Eastern time, where this thing's going to be coming on shore, and that's on the bottom right side of your screen. You can see the National Hurricane Center cone. 7 p.m. is just offshore. So by the time you get to 8 to 9 p.m., by current expectations, this thing will be making landfall at that point in time. And by the time, of course, you get to 7 a.m. Eastern time on Tuesday, this thing's going to be well inland in Nicaragua, getting towards crossing into Honduras at that point. So really, the unfortunate thing, too, is that this thing's going to be coming on quicker to landfall, so people have a bit less time to repair, conditions deteriorating a bit quicker than prior expectations. Not as much time necessarily over the very warm waters, but it's also less time for certain weakening processes to occur in the face of shear. Isaac, you have this new satellite imagery up right now. Oh, God. Isaac? We're not hearing things.
It might have had a microphone issue or something.
Oh, yeah, okay. I thought I had an audio problem for a second, but I just can't hear. But I have this up really quick. That's the latest satellite imagery that Isaac's working with right now.
Okay, Isaac's
Isaac must have
he just dropped. Okay, so that was just... Well, it happens. It's the hijinks of live coverage, but we still have, the geocolored, the visible imagery, and we do have some mesoscale and rapid scan updating imagery that shows those cloud tops right here.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you, Isaac. What's up?
There we go.
I was trying to green through here. I don't know if it's going up now, but my software decided to crash, so I'm using the second best thing right now. And here's sound-wetch imagery off of Go 16 here, and you can see the storm, how it's progressed throughout the past 2 hours here. And this is a combination of infrared and visible imagery combined into one little band, which they called sandwich band as a nickname here. And you can really see from earlier, the eye is really clouded out over, and you can barely see through it. And now in the last few frames, especially, you can really see that starting to clear out now. So really unfortunate to see this happening.
Yeah, the storm's looking arguably more impressive than ever at this point in time with the way its eye is clearing out. Someone asking, are there evacuation orders in place in Central America? The answer to that is a very profound yes, and unfortunately has been for several days in anticipation of this storm. There's been evacuation orders in place in Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Belize now ahead of it. So 5 separate countries have had some sort of evacuation orders in place ahead of this system, not just because of the general impacts, but because a lot of it will be occurring in very similar areas that just got rainfall and impacts from Eta. And like we mentioned before, one of the issues is that there isn't enough time really to fix up and repair some of the infrastructure or planning tools that they use to prevent flooding. We mentioned those one-time use flood stoppers. That's an issue right now where you're in a situation where they haven't had time to rebuild those because the system is coming on shore just 2 weeks after Hurricane Eta did, which happened at the very start of November as well. Thomas, you have some satellite imagery up as well. What do you have to say about it real quickly?
Well, it's looking concerning, unfortunately. I mean, the biggest observations that I'm making at this point, we have the minus 80s nearly. I think they've actually gotten to around halfway around the eye. You can see they're breaking up a little bit, so I don't see this becoming a full ring of minus 80s in the end. My bigger concern is the fact that you can see there those minus 70s to the eye. The distance between the minus 70s and the eye is shrinking, which is a sign that the eyewall is contracting or becoming more compact and the pressure gradient is getting tighter, which results in stronger winds. So this is a sign to me that the storm is strengthening, and I find that really concerning. And with the triple outflow that it has, it's going to be able to basically ventilate perfectly. So you can get this convection that bursts up like this, tons of convection, and the odds that it's going to overwhelm the storm are very low because it doesn't have the normal 2 channels. It has a 3rd channel to be able to vent that latent heat away from. So you can have an extremely powerful eye that's not going to overwhelm the outflow channels.
Yeah, and that also feeds briefly into another question as well in terms of the structure, stability. Someone asking, is there a chance an Eyewall replacement cycle occurs, and would that be a detriment overall? Kay, do you want to pick up on that one real quick?
Well, at this point, an Eyewall replacement cycle wouldn't be complete by the time Landfall made unless it was an unusually quick one. But assuming it's a normal one and it doesn't decide to do something even more ridiculous and try and do a merger, regular Eyewall replacement cycle brings down the winds, causes some pressure rise, but the changes at this point within 12 hours of landfall, the surge is going to be that of a Category 5, whether it weakens below Category 5 or otherwise. Because I hear that when you look at surge, you look at what the storm was 12 hours ago, and that tells you what it'll likely be like.
Yep. And I do think, really important to note regardless of that, is that the worst impacts, aren't going to be changing now whatsoever because of a last-second change in intensity, whether it be, 5 to 10 miles an hour stronger or 5 to 10 miles an hour weaker. You're still looking at a situation where you're going to have a Category 5 or very near it coming on shore, and those worst impacts being consistent prolonged rainfall over several days over areas that just received major impacts from Hurricane Eta 2 weeks ago. People will talk a lot and converse a lot about the exact intensity at landfall, because that's what's mentioned a lot in general media, and when you look at historical footnotes afterwards, whether it be, Wikipedia or historical news articles or just general public conversation, a lot of people focus on the wind, but, we've said it before and we'll say it again, the worst impacts from this system in particular will be from its prolonged rainfall effects widespread over regions that just got very similar rainfall impacts from Hurricane Eta just 2 weeks ago. So while there may be some fluctuations in intensity in the final hours to landfall, whether that be up or down, it doesn't matter too much because we're still looking at an extraordinarily life-threatening storm, which is coming on shore now at least in at most 8 to 9 hours. We talked about it briefly as well. This thing's been moving a bit faster than prior expectations, and that's going to mean that this thing is coming on shore a bit quicker, less time to prepare for people, unfortunately, in that regard. May push down some rainfall totals very slightly, but that doesn't minimize the life-threatening risk that this brings. Stage 9 on the CDPS scale, widespread areas of above 20 inches of total rainfall expected right now, with maximums going up towards 750 to 800 plus millimeters of rainfall. Obviously on top of what we've seen, it's potentially catastrophic, and everyone should be taking this very seriously and listening to the local officials if they're giving any specific evacuation orders. We're going to be heading off the air in just a minute, so I want to get some last comments from the team, but I do want to note that we do have our 24/7 Hurricane Tracker live, automated to give updates, and we will be live again to cover landfall later today alongside graphic posts on Facebook and Twitter, so stay tuned on outlets for those. Do we have any last comments in particular ahead of this system, guys?
I'm particularly concerned about this storm because, as we've touched on so many times, this same area has had an impact from Hurricane Eta 2 or 3 weeks ago, and considering this is a stronger storm than Eta, it's again the devastation and heartbreak that we saw from Eta as well. I don't even want to think about what's going to happen.
Yep. I mean, there's really no better way to put it. Any other comments, guys?
You're on the coast. It's almost too late to evacuate unless you have a clean road route out that isn't interrupted. If you're unable to get out and you haven't evacuated yet, you should get to ground above surge and try to find shelter. If you're further inland and you haven't evacuated from an area that's under an order due to freshwater flooding, then I would strongly advise you do so. and follow all local official orders and do the best you can to protect yourselves and those around you.
Yep. And with that, that'll wrap up our coverage right now, at least this hour of live coverage on Category 5 Hurricane Iota ahead of its landfall in Nicaragua this evening into tonight. We'll be live again later today to cover the landfall, so make sure you're subscribed to stay tuned so you know when we're going live next with more coverage. We'll also have, like I said, the automated tracker 24/7 live to give updates and satellite imagery, and we'll also have hourly text posts coming up on Twitter, at Force13 to Twitter and find us there. And we also have our Facebook page, which is Force13 there. And you can also join our Discord server to stay up to date with our latest updates and coverage and chat with other people about this storm. Thank you for watching, everyone, and please stay safe in lieu of this life-threatening situation.